We were talking a little bit about Easter, a few of us, and what gospel passage should we use? And George said, use Luke because we've been reading from Luke recently, and then this week, we're not. The lectionary decided that it wanted to give us John. So the lectionary is a set of readings from the scriptures that, I don't know who makes this thing. Different organizations make their own, but there is a common, and it's actually called the Common Lectionary, that lots of people use, lots of different churches use. It lets you read through the Bible in 3 years. Now, if you are familiar with the Bible, you know that there are how many Gospels? 4. So John just gets sprinkled in. And I don't know why that is, because the other 3 are very much like one another. They tell the same stories. They have a very similar outline. Sometimes they even use the same words, the same phrasing, just almost like somebody was copying and pasting, because they were. We don't know who and how they were copying and pasting. There are all manner of theories. And then there are all of these questions about how John, the Gospel of John, is related to the other 3. Was John aware of these Gospels? Or did John have some other source that's sometimes called Q? Which means, it's from a German word that means source. No one knows how John is related to the other Gospels. And recently, some theories have kind of bubbled to the surface that maybe John was very familiar with these other 3 Gospels and was almost writing a response to what they have to say. So, the story that we read today is unusual in that it is represented in all 4 Gospels. Now, things like the crucifixion, resurrection, yes, are all represented in all 4 Gospels. John doesn't have a lot of overlap in terms of stories. This is one that overlaps. And oh yeah, here's my chart. I didn't get rid of it. I made a little table so I could see how these stories are connected to each other, how they tell the story. Luke is unusual, though. Luke doesn't have the story the way that the other 3 have it, which is weird, right? Luke should sound more like Matthew and Mark because they seem to rely on each other. Luke tells this story about Jesus going to someone's house. This is a person who is a Pharisee named Simon, not Lazarus. Do you see there's an issue there, right? He goes to Simon's house, probably in a town called Nain, which is up north. The story in John takes place in Bethany, which is right outside of Jerusalem. It's at Lazarus' house. There's a woman who comes along, and she is a woman of ill repute. And she is so grateful to Jesus, we're not exactly sure why, but so grateful to him that she pours this perfume on him, on his feet, and then starts wiping his feet with her hair. It's kind of, that happens in John too. He says, she's just grateful to me when everyone questions why she's doing this. There's no word about death and resurrection. There's no word about death and burial. There's no mention of the poor always being with you in Luke. Matthew and Mark set the story in the home of a person named Simon, the leper, not the Pharisee. He maybe was a Pharisee and a leper. Double whammy, possibly. Jesus is anointed for his death. This woman comes and pours perfume, I think, on his head in those stories. There's an alabaster jar mentioned. John doesn't mention that. There are lots of other points of comparison, but I hope you can see that there are these interesting ways that people decide to tell these stories because they want to emphasize different things. They sound like the same story, don't they? With slightly different details. And someone might have argued about it. Wasn't that at Simon's house? Yes. You remember Simon the Pharisee? No, it was Simon the leper. No, I think it was Lazarus' house. Maybe that's where this happened. All of these various things happening, right? Various pieces coming together. John sets the story at the house of Lazarus, Martha, and Mary. Now, make sure that you know, which this is very strange. This is only a couple chapters later, after the resurrection of Lazarus, the raising of Lazarus. But he wants you to know this is the guy Jesus raised from the dead. And then he has really kind of snarky things to say about Judas, right? Oh, he would just steal money right out of the bag all the time. We know that. Lazarus has been raised from the dead. In the book, the novel, The Last Temptation of Christ, Lazarus never quite recovers. There are scenes when Jesus comes and visits Lazarus, and he's kind of slumped over in the corner. He kind of smells bad. He's sort of anemic. Because being dead is a difficult job, apparently. And maybe Lazarus wants to go back to sleep. Have you ever had a good sleep? Maybe Lazarus is like, I don't want to get up. Then this woman comes, and Mary comes, and she pours perfume on Jesus' feet. This time it's specifically nard. I don't know what that means. And she wipes his feet with her hair. It's kind of shades of, what's that song from Jesus Christ Superstar? I don't know how to love him. Shades of that, right? You kind of feel that. And Jesus says to the people who are distressed, specifically Judas, distressed over this waste of money, two things. Poverty is not going to be solved by the cost of this perfume. And I'm not always going to be around. It seems unusual, but this is kind of what Jesus is doing all through the Gospel of John. He probably does it in the other Gospels, but if you read John, Jesus is always getting people ready for him not being there. Later on, he's going to talk to them about sending what he calls the Comforter to these people. He breathes on them and breathes the Holy Ghost out into them, and they can go on, but he's not there anymore. Only his breath exists with them and in them. He has this prayer at the end of the story asking that they all might be one. That they all might be one, as thou, Father, art in me, and I in thee, they may be one in us. They might live in solidarity with us and with one another. I pray that they all might be in solidarity, like you're in solidarity with me, and I'm in solidarity with you. And the people who first read this gospel, and you and I, have never seen Jesus. And yet there is this promise at the end of the Gospel of John that if you understand these things and if you hold on to them, then somehow you live in the absence of Jesus with the presence of Jesus. Is that a lovely paradox? I don't like it any more than you do. Actually, you know I love that kind of stuff. That's a difficult thing, though. We live in solidarity with Jesus in the absence of Jesus. The absence of Jesus in the Gospel of John becomes the distribution of divinity. Because, again, Jesus breathes on these disciples, and then his breath moves through the world. And hopefully for these first readers of this gospel, and maybe hopefully for you and me, that means something. That draws us into the absent presence of Jesus in the world with us. And I'm never sure exactly how to phrase this. A lot of times I will say things like, maybe God is the emptiness out of which everything emerges. And then my theistic friends say, no, well, maybe God is the fullness out of which everything emerges. Yeah, okay, yes. Maybe God is the emptiness out of which everything emerges. Don't run away from that. Just sit with that for a minute. Let that be uncomfortable. Let that be a strange thing. Let that be paradoxical, like the absent presence. Let that be something that draws you away from simple answers. Let it be something that pulls you out of this sort of binary and bifurcated way of thinking about the world and allows you to enter into this deeper understanding. We live in a world that is mostly made up of empty space anyway. There are holes in everything, between atoms, inside of atoms. And this is not my 8th grade science project. This is not a scientific statement, although there are holes in everything. There are holes in you. There is more empty space in you than there is actual stuff. And yet here we are with the stuff. Does that mean anything about God? I don't know, maybe. Could it? Could God be this sort of emptiness? And then we are invited over and over again into to contemplating the void, the abyss. This is the existential moment when we realize our own mortality and we have a choice to make. And it isn't one moment in our lives. It starts to happen when you're maybe 13, 15, 18, 25. older. And as you get older, that feeling is different, isn't it? It's scarier in some ways, and it's more comfortable in other ways. But we look out into that emptiness, and we find somehow some kind of meaning, ways to continue to move forward in the world despite the fearfulness of that. It invites us into what Jesus in the Gospel of John calls being born again. Being reborn, living life again, and living towards something. And if that kind of existentialism feels nihilistic to you, it feels frightening to you, if finding meaning in the depth of meaninglessness, if finding hope where there is despair, if finding life in death is a difficult thing for you, put it in religious terms. We're in the middle of Lent. You know where Lent is headed? Well, maybe Easter, yes. But you know where Lent is headed first? Good Friday. Lent is headed toward crucifixion. Lent is headed toward hopelessness and despair. And we ought not to shy away from that. We should be able to stare directly at that. Or, you know what? That's wrong. We shouldn't be able to stare directly at that. We should have to look at it around the corner. We should have to look at it through a mirror, like you're Jason fighting Medusa. We should look at it through shaded glasses, like you're looking at an eclipse. It's not an easy thing to look at and to contemplate, and we ought to shelter ourselves and protect ourselves from that. But we still don't want to shy away from it. We should still check it out. Even if it means just looking at the ground, like the leaves, the shadows of leaves during an eclipse. At least we ought to look at it and try to figure out what it means for us and to us and in us. You won't always have me, but you'll always have the poor. That's a strange thing for Jesus to say, isn't it? It doesn't seem to fit with the Jesus that we encounter everywhere else. This is the Jesus who is constantly cajoling his followers to care for one another, to be responsible for their neighbors, especially the least of these, as he puts it somewhere else. Jesus even goes so far as to say that when you encounter marginalized people, you have a divine encounter. When you encounter people who are sick, in prison, hungry, thirsty, naked, unhoused, when you meet those people, you meet what he calls the Son of Man, who is the representative of God. You have divine encounters when you encounter the least of these. And not when you give out of your largesse, not when you give out of your power, not when you give out of everything that you have, but when you give and you visit and you are present despite what you don't have. Then you have these divine encounters. The absence of Christ becomes the distribution of divinity all through the world. Cain, at the beginning of our book, Cain says this to God: "Am I my brother's keeper?" God says, "Where's your brother?" He says, "I don't know. Am I in charge of him? Am I responsible for him?" And there's no answer. God doesn't say, "Yes, of course you are responsible for your sisters and brothers and others." But the implied answer is, yeah, you are. You are responsible for them. And maybe that's why Luke holds back that part of the story. Because Luke, maybe more than the other Gospels, it's hard to know, Luke is very concerned with this great reversal when the last are first and the first are last. Luke says, "Blessed are the poor," end of sentence. "Blessed are those who are hungry," end of sentence. "Blessed are those who thirst," end of the sentence. Luke doesn't add little pieces about in spirit. Luke just says, if you're poor, if you're hungry, if you're thirsty, that is where you find divine encounter. Jesus says in other places, it's easier for a camel to slip through the eye of a needle than for a rich person to encounter the way of God in the world. Sell everything you own, give the money to the poor, and then come and follow me. And you know what happens at the end of that story? The person Jesus is encountering goes away sad. The text says because he had a lot of possessions. So this doesn't sound like the Jesus that we encounter, but there's something to it. I often hear this story or this little phrase, "the poor you will always have with you," as an excuse to build ostentatious cathedrals and megachurches, such as our own. I'm sure that when you all were contemplating this building, you said, well, the poor you will always have with you, but my God, look at this building. Have you seen it? Have you seen the carpet? It's amazing. You did it right. Good job. Or we use it as an excuse to neglect. We use it as an excuse to not care for those who are marginalized and those who are poor. Why should I take care of them? If you want more money, get a better job. Amen? Come on now. If you want a better job, if you want more money, get a better job. If you want a better job, get a better education. Apply for something. Apply yourself. Stop being so lazy. Walmart and McDonald's aren't supposed to be career choices. And these people, right? That's what you hear over and over again. And then if you're a good Christian person, you tack that other piece on. You'll always have the poor with you. So why should I be responsible for them? Why should I care for them? But I hope that it is abundantly clear that not even crucifixion and loss and death should be an excuse to ignore the marginalized among us. Whether it's the crucifixion and the loss and the death of Jesus or our own crucifixion and loss and death. And I wonder if Jesus or the gospel writers had Deuteronomy 15 in mind, but here it is. Since there will never cease to be those in need among you on the earth, I command you to open your hand to the poor and the needy in your land. Pretty straightforward stuff. So whenever we preach this, we always run the risk of as we remind ourselves of our obligation to those people who are marginalized, it is so tempting to set up this us-them dichotomy, right? We will take care of them. And it's very tempting to individualize it. I will take care of this one person. And we forget and we neglect systemic problems, systemic injustice. And then some of us will say to each other, well, what can we do about that? We're not responsible for that. Jesus never tells us to overthrow the Roman Empire. And yet we did overthrow the Roman Empire, and we created this society that pretends to be democratic, that pretends that you and I have all of the power, right? Isn't that the lie they tell you in school? I'm sorry, it's not a lie. It is a lie. It is a lie. Oh, it's a beautiful dream, too, at the same time, right? So it becomes this way of thinking about the world. And if you and I truly are in power, if democracy, the rule-ocracy of the people, matters at all, then you and I have responsibility to create a society that is just and equitable and fair and pushes back against the C word, capitalism, that disempowers capitalism, not just individually, but for the whole society. We want to create solidarity, not charity. And I know that's an easy phrase to kind of say, to throw around, but it means something. It seems so easy for middle-class people to assuage our sense of maybe guilt by giving a little. And it also allows the system to keep on chugging forward. Charity is a great gift to capitalism, because it doesn't make the system responsible for people. It's a pressure release valve. And then industries and corporations can continue to grind over people, to drive the soul out of humanity. And we just patch it up just a little bit. It's just a little bit. It's not enough. It's a little bit. Does that mean that we shouldn't be charitable? No. This isn't an either or. It's important to get away from bifurcated thinking. That's my word for today, by the way. I've said it 3 times, I think. I didn't even write it down once. It's important to get away from that sort of dichotomized way of thinking about the world. It isn't either we're charitable or we work for systemic change. It is both and. It is using whatever power, or little or great, that we have to change the way the world is. So, I think it's been a while since well, maybe it hasn't. I was going to say it's been a while since I've given you a lyric from a song, but here's a song from a band of anarchist Christians from the 1990s named Ballydoes. Ballydoes is the name of a town in a movie called The War of the Buttons, which is kind of a battle between these rich kids in one town and the poor kids in Ballydoes, and how they have this fight where they're stealing buttons from each other. I don't really get it, but eventually they come together and they create this different way of living together. But here's a little lyric from them. Underbred and underway, we're leaping to the fray, throwing for the lovely underdogs. Under brush and underbelly, flags flying willy-nilly, we'll undermine the greedy and the cruel. Come along, all are welcome, let man's barriers be broken, from silver spoons to empty pockets all. Raise your glass and raise your voice, ain't against then before us. No paradise we'll reap, but we'll go down plowing just the same. And that, in some sense, might be what the gospel is. That might be what Jesus is talking about, at least in this little story. There's no paradise to reap, but we'll go down plowing just the same. The undoing of catastrophe happens when we just keep moving forward. Tolkien calls it eucatastrophe, the undoing of evil and wickedness in the world. When we have life coming out of the ashes, when we have despair giving birth to hope. But the only way to get there is through hopelessness. The only way to get there is through despair. The only way to get toward life is through this willingness to be dead. And it's easy to use Easter as a shield against suffering. I think that Christian people do that all the time, or at least a false sense of hope, that suffering doesn't really matter because everything is going to give way and everything is going to be all right. But I think that is unfaithful to what the gospel is all about. Because meaning that is created or rests on this non-existent future isn't meaning at all. The resurrection is something that asks us to find meaning in meaninglessness. The resurrection is meaning that comes out of a meaningless act. The crucifixion, the death, and the burial of Jesus is this hopeless, meaningless experience. And the resurrection is this idea that, yeah, but after that, meaning can be created and can become something. At the end of the movie, Don't Look Up, we were talking about this the other night. There is a great scene. Have you all seen this movie? It's good and bad, right? Like, it's terrible. And it's also delightful. Like, there are some really great parts to it. But at the end of the movie, after trying to do everything they can and failing, and doing it poorly, by the way, doing a very bad job of doing everything they can, but doing everything they can. Every effort has been exhausted. The main characters sit down to dinner together. And they talk about the merits of store-bought apple pie versus homemade apple pie and grinding your own coffee beans. And the world is collapsing around them. And they sit together, and there's a great, I think it was an extemporaneous prayer offered by, what's that boy's name? Timothy Chalamet. This beautiful prayer of hope at the end of it, as the world just ends. And that sounds meaningless because there is no future. So why are you going to sit down and talk about apple pie if you can't then 2 days later think about the conversation about apple pie? But the meaning happens in that very moment. And it's not a meaningless moment. It perhaps is the most meaningful part of their lives and the most meaningful part of that story just before it ends. So now I think we find ourselves, and I don't want to say more than ever, because the reality is we have always been confronting systems of evil and systems of oppression. But now we find ourselves in a very unique situation. We find ourselves obligated to the poor, to immigrants, to Palestinians, to trans kids, to anyone who speaks out against injustice. We are called to work toward care for creation. We are called to work toward whatever leads to this better world. No paradise to gain, but we're still working. We're still moving forward. We're still enjoying the coffee at the end of the movie. We are still plowing. All the same, no matter what, even headed toward crucifixion, because that doesn't matter. Meaning comes out of meaninglessness for Christians. The poor you will always have with you. And that's no excuse to stop working. Amen? Amen. Amen-ish? I don't know.